So thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation. The topic of my presentation is the notion of social world in the phenomenological project of Gustav Shpet. And the main works of Shpet, which are relevant to the notion of social world, were written about 100 years ago. However, I think the notion of social world of Shpet stay relevant, especially for the contemporary debate about the social phenomena. But before the exposition of the main topic, I'd like to highlight that Shpet does not consider the concept of the social world as a separate, independent concept. He doesn't create a distinct and developed phenomenological concept of social world, which could be regarded as proto-sociology. Shpet's understanding of the social world is fundamentally different. His notion is one of the key notions of his phenomenological concept from the beginning. And Shpet's phenomenological concept and the notion of the social world are related as a whole and its part. Understanding the notion of social world necessarily requires an understanding of the features of his phenomenological concept as a whole. Likewise, the idea of his phenomenological project remains incomplete without clarifying the function of the social world in relation to the cognitive ability of consciousness. The reconstruction of Shpet's concept of the social worlds requires pointing out the specific of Shpet's phenomenological project. Therefore, in my presentation, I'm focused on the main problem of Shpet's phenomenology and its methodological solution in order to show how it stipulates the notion of social world. So, briefly, Shpet's phenomenological project can be characterized as a project of phenomenological ontology. He postulates his understanding of the essence of phenomenology, starting from his first work in Appearance and Sense, 1914, created immediately after attending Husserl's lecture in Göttingen. Shpet sees the main task of phenomenology not only in studying cognition itself, not only cognizing consciousness itself as a means of cognition. Phenomenology should aim at this cognition in its being. I quote, "Our concern is with a study of the being of cognition in its essence, that is, a distinctive kind of being. Therefore, if what a result is a theory, it is a theory not of knowledge or cognition, but of being." End of quote. It is in this form, according to Shpet, phenomenology is capable of claiming the role of a universal theory of science and of knowledge in general. In other words, the function of phenomenology is a universal theory of science, and cognition for Shpet is a matter of content, but not substantiation, as was the case with Husserl. Therefore, it is understandable why the main phenomenological question, according to Shpet, is the question, what is? And that what for Shpet is the subject of phenomenology, the what is not limited to the ontology of cognition, but necessarily includes the ontology of the cognizable world. This understanding of phenomenology defines the area that should be in scope of the research. The solutions that phenomenological ontology is looking for should be applicable to the cognition as such. Considering the task of phenomenological ontology in this aspect, Shpet points to the existence of a certain empirical being which Husserl missed, and in connection to which the analysis of cognition in its being is only possible. This type of empirical being is the social being that has a special mode of giveness and a special mode of cognition. In his argumentation of social being, Shpet relies on Husserl's principle of all principles. However, his arguments relate only to the first part of the principle of all principles, namely on the assertion that every originally presenting intuition is a legitimating source of cognition. So, in this position, Shpet critically assesses the very distinction between the two types of intuition, sensual and ideal. For Husserl, it is the distinction between natural attitude, so natürliche Einstellung, and eidetic seeing, Wesensanschauung. Yeah? Shpet does not consider this distinction sufficient for this possibility of any cognition. Shpet does not deny the cognitive function of the sensual and ideal intuitions. However, he insists on their limitation. Both of them are associated with the cognition of only one type of reality, either empirical or logical. Shpet insists on the existence of something, as he says, third something, which is not a synthesis of sensual and ideal intuitions, but in their basis has a primary meaning and is an originary giveness. By this third something, he understands a special kind of intuition, which he designates as a social intuition. This interpretation of principle of all principles makes it possible to outline the context in which the concept of the social world gets its first concretization. The social world for Shpet is an appearance of social being. It is an originary giveness. It means it is an actuality. Its essence is grasped in a social intuition, and this context indicates that the subsequent concretization of the notion of the social world is associated with the structure of intentionality. In this case, special attention should be paid to the question that Shpet has in mind all the time. How is the originariveness present in the structure of consciousness? This question means a shift of emphasis in the main phenomenological problem, the problem of the correlation of consciousness and actuality. For Husserl, this is a problem of pure intentionality. For Shpet, the main question is the question about the source of originariveness in the structure of the intentionality, as well as of the phenomenon. In the methodological aspect, this question was formulated by Shpet in two ways. On the one hand, it concerns the giveness of sense in the noema. On the other hand, Shpet raises the question of the ability of positional acts of categorical positing to lead to sense and objectivity. The meaning of this question is fully clarified if we bear in mind the distinction Shpet draws between the signification and sense. As you know, Husserl doesn't distinguish sense and signification, while Shpet draws a subtle distinction between them based on their formal difference. In other words, for Shpet, this distinction is a systematic distinction stipulated by the structure of intention. Shpet defines the signification as an indication of the content of an expression. The signification does not go beyond the defined content and is established by a logical connection. The sense is a designation of an object in its defining qualification. It is associated with the definition of ontological status, signs in the sense of it is associated with the definition of ontological status, since it the sense of a concrete thing. Yeah. It may seem that this definition violates the logic of argumentation, the logical connection between an object and signification and the ontological status of a concrete thing are not categories of the same order. The feeling of violation of the logic of argumentation is intensified when Shpet characterizes the definition of sense as hidden, intimate to the thing itself, or its origin. In his text in Russia, he used the German word in bracket Ursprung. Yeah, this is very interesting choice of the word. It's obvious, but we shouldn't get distracted by it. This could be the topic of another conversation. It's important that Shpet is actually very consistent in his argumentation. And Shpet's distinction between signification and sense get fully clarified by his definition of the internal sense of the object itself as entelechy. Now, it is necessary to trace down how it affects the structure of intentionality. Yeah. Methodologically, the difference in Shpet's point of view is due to the function of entelechy as a motivation that directs the flow of acts of consciousness. According to Husserl, the concatenation of experience, also Erfahrungszusammenhang, is postulated by the correlation of motivation and horizon of experiential actuality. For Shpet, motivation correlates with a concrete thing given originally. Now it becomes clear why Shpet asserts that the structure of intentionality is not fully covered by Husserl. The result of Husserl's description of intentionality is a constitution of a phenomenon, which is implemented as a discovery of signification. For Shpet, an analysis of intentionality alone is insufficient since it does not provide a possibility to answer the main question of phenomenology, how the world and consciousness correlate, and hence how the things of the world, the concrete thing are given in consciousness. Shpet insists that the problem of intentionality should be viewed as a problem of the actual being. It means that the problem of intentionality is a problem of reason and actuality. He sees the purpose of his searches as a discovery of the source of originary giveness and the structure of the phenomenon. He does not find in Husserl's presentation of the intentionality. And how does Shpet himself explain the structure of the intentionality? For Shpet, an indication of the source of the originary giveness is the entelechy of a concrete object. As a motivation, it is a certain quality of the object which does not coincide with the content of the noema. Entelechy deviates from the noematic core. It leads to the essence of the object and at the same time reveals the object being described in its essential relations or concatenations. Establishing or grasping entelechy is described as a conversion of the intentional consciousness into the new stratum of experience. Here, the intention is directed to a deeper core of noema, in accordance to which the noeses also take a new direction. The entelechy on an object is revealed in this stratum. The object gets fixed in its concreteness, that is, in its teleology. Obviously, the establishing entelechy requires special acts in the structure of intentionality. For Shpet, they are the special acts which animate the doxa itself, as Shpet says. They are not positional acts, but are found in these positional acts. As we know, Shpet refers to these acts as hermeneutic acts, since they are directed to the concrete, to the content of the noema as to the sign of entelechy. Shpet also calls these acts sense bestowing, since they fill the notion with sense, namely with the sense of actual being, without which the notion stays, as Shpet puts in, mechanical. This is a very important provision of Shpet's concept, which is of fundamental importance for understanding the essence of being, which Shpet calls social, as well as for understanding the ontological status of the social world and its objects. Introduction of hermeneutic or sense-bestowing acts provides Shpet with the possibility of the theoretical substantiation of ontological constructions of teleological system, so says Shpet. In other words, Shpet phenomenological substantiates a certain order of essences as well as actions themselves. Shpet points out a direct connection between his conclusions and the issue of the means and the end. But his conclusions also open the possibilities for a systematic research of the issue of human existence. However, in analysis of Shpet's concept of social world, this conclusion is still preliminary. A more or less complete understanding of Shpet's term of the social world requires not only an understanding of the structure of intentionality, but also the structure of the phenomenon as such. This implies the need to consider Shpet's concept of the inner form of the world, a concept that, in my opinion, is an important part of his integral phenomenological project, which would stay incomplete without it. Shpet addresses the issue of the inner form of the world in two of his work, in Static Fragments created during 1922-1923, and in the work written 4 years later, Inner Form of the World. Both of the works have a common topic of analysis, the structure of the world and its inner form. However, the conceptual focus of these works is different. The work Aesthetic Fragments gives a general idea of the function of the position of the world as a socio-cultural phenomenon, while the research in Inner Form of the world is a systematic study. A clarification should be made here right away. Shpet does not mean the verbal word. Therefore, the analysis of the concept of a word only within the framework of the philosophy of language does not quite fit the idea of Shpet. Shpet understands the word broadly like a phenomenon that expresses sense. In Aesthetic Fragments, he says, any sensory perception of any extent and temporal form, of any volume and of any duration can be considered as a sense-bestowing sign, as a word. This means that any phenomenon of culture is a word. That is, a word is a phenomenon and archetype of culture. And what determines the understanding of the word in Shpet's concept, and how can the term social world be understood through the word? Two factors need to be taken in account here. The first is the ontological status of the word. It is determined by its relation with the transcendence. The words is the only way, so Shpet, only way to understand the transcendence it is the only possibility to translate it into an image accessible to reason, and it is a function as a translation on the transcendence into an image. The word is, and and in this function, the word is actuality. And the second factor is that the word is an ontological prototype of any social cultural thing. In other words, the formal features of a word, which Shpet understands as a law of the functioning of the sense, are formal features of all social cultural things. This very possibility is due to the universality of the logical forms that correspond to the ideal objective forms. As a law of cognizing consciousness, this point makes the foundation of the phenomenological method in general. In the concept of the inner form of the word, Shpet generalized this principle and on its basis methodologically substantiates the formation of sense in phenomena. What is the structure which is the formation of sense, which is universal for all social cultural phenomena? Such a structure, or rather an element of the structure of the word, is the inner form of the word. The inner form of the word, according to Shpet, is the result of the relation between the external form or the form of the external imprinting of the word and the ontic or idea or ideal or pure form. That is the direction of the direction of the structure of the word is conceived by Shpet not linearly, but this direction is connected to the notion of depth. The structure is a movable constant, and movement in it can qualitatively change the elements. In Act 2, the elements of the structure can change. In Potentia, all parts are present. So, represented schematically, the structure of a word in Shpet concept look like this, or at least can look like this. External form, yeah? External form. Shpet attributes to it the mental perception of the empirical expression of a word, morphological form, and their nominative function. Further, the ontic form. So the ontic form in which the object is implied is conceived in intellectual intuition. This is an area of the ideal object. And the inner form, which is the form of the origin of sense. It is created from the relation between external and ontic form. In the inner
Excuse
form,
me. I apologize I apologize for interrupting you, but
I will to okay. Can I have just one?
Yes,
minute?
yes, of course, no problem. I just wanted to, just to let you know that if you want to have a discussion, there should be some.
Okay.
You should. I apologize. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. But yes, I really need just a minute. Okay. So in the inner form, Shpet distinguished between two levels as you see. The first is the logical form. It is a relation between external form and ideal sense. It is clear that these forms are dynamic. So, and the second level of the inner form is the inner differential form of the language, or poetic form. It's based on a logical form and arises from the relation between logical form and syntagmas. And yeah, in conclusion, I will outline some the most important points for understanding the concept of the social world. The structure of intentionality and the structure of the inner form of a word is a context that defines Shpet's understanding of the concept of the social world. For Shpet, the social world is the actuality which is based on the law of manifestation of sense. In other words, the concept of the social world is defined by Shpet through the category of sense. In this definition, the social world is substantiated as the integrity of the idea and perceived reality, and as correlation between the transcendence and as a theological word. In this respect, the social world and the appearance of the social world is a certain order of essences as well as action themselves. For Shpet, this is stipulated by the very structure of the manifestation of sense. I make end here. So thank you very much, and I apologize, I was too late maybe. So reference. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for your detailed presentation of Shpet's notion of the social world. We have a couple of moments to put the presented paper to discussion. So please, if anyone would like to ask a question of Ms. Kryshevska, please just raise your hand or start your microphone.
How time have we now for the question? I don't have here.
I think we can have we can take a couple of moments, at least we can have a couple of minutes, yeah, like 5 minutes.
Okay, or as one possibility, if someone have a question, we can write it in the chat, and I answer the and I'm answering the question later in the chat. If so.
So Mr. Neumann has a question. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Just a side question, maybe. I'm interested where this notion of teleology comes from in Shpet's theory, because it in itself it seems quite foreign to phenomenology, maybe. And so, what's the relationship between teleology and ontology? So, is the idea that we come that we are able to get a better grasp on reality, in the sense that we reach the teleology of reality itself through intentionality, or what is the idea?
Oh, yes, thank you. It is not easy. It is not a easy question, you know, and it is a big question. And Gustav Shpet himself says about this not much, and the connection between the ontology, between the being of actuality and the teleology is a connection between entelechy of a concrete thing and it's teleology, which can be open, can be found in just in an ideal word, in just as an idea, but it's important to note it that the actuality for Shpet, it is actuality of many concrete things. Shpet insist that the intuition and perception, that be and being of the world is always the being of a concrete thing. So, and with him, he connect the actuality, the world, and teleology. But I know and I understand it. This need to be made clearly, yeah, it is a good point. It is a good point for the research, for the understanding what Shpet concretely mean.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. If there are no further questions at the moment, I suggest that we move on to the next paper.